Well, hello and welcome to another Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. It's great to see you again, and I do hope that you are doing as well as you are. Behind me then are some images about the death penalty, and I wonder how many of these you already recognise. How many of these are ones that you know, and how many of these are ones that still happen in the world today? While some of them, like for example the second one, hung, drawn and quartering, definitely do not happen today, but others of them, such as hanging, the electric chair, the gas chamber, the lethal injection, are all forms of capital punishment which occur around the world today and are certainly legal in some countries. So today we're going to think about the question as, does the death penalty have to be humane? Does it have to be kind on people, or can we execute people that have done really bad crimes in terrible ways? So there are thoughts for this session, and what I'd like you to do is go and grab your pen and paper, because here's our cheesy intro music. Okay, so our title today is the death penalty such a bad idea? Ignore the date, that's just the date I recorded this on. So we're going to explore Christian attitudes towards the death penalty, and that's what our objective is today. During today's session, it's going to be good if we know what the death penalty is. It's going to be great if you can give arguments for and against it, and it's going to be even better if you can justify your own reasons for or against the death penalty and your own opinions with that. So, normally in a classroom we'd have a big debate about this, there'd be a big discussion going on, and but you might do that through social media, through WhatsApp, through Messenger, through whatever format you may use. So during today's session, we've got a media clip. We're going to look at one story with 4 different opinions. We're going to think, what do Christians think? And then we've got a C question to reflect on. And then next lesson, we're going to pick this up and carry on as well. So to start off with then, these are things that I'd like to think about. What is the death penalty? What types of death penalty are mentioned in this clip? And what is death row? So maybe you could write those 3 questions out. I've got a clip to show you. All of these clips today have been taken from TrueTube and other places that I've found stuff. So thanks to them for this. So I'd like you to watch this clip and to identify the answers to those 3 questions. What is the death penalty? What types of death penalty are mentioned? And what is death row? Let's watch this now.
Hello, I'm Seema.
And I'm Lena.
And we both work as researchers at the Centre for Capital Punishment Studies. Centre for Capital Punishment Studies is based within the law school at the University of Westminster. We're a research and advocacy group, and we look into issues surrounding the death penalty and related human rights issues. In the UK, the first hanging was conducted in the 5th century, and the last hanging was in 1964, before it was finally abolished in 1965. In a lot of regions, the death penalty did not exist until it was brought over by the Europeans that were colonising these places. In Africa, for example, it was brought over by the Europeans, whereas before their most severe punishment would be exile. And that was considered a worse punishment, being cut off from the community and never being allowed back to meet family and friends and things like that.
Well, the most common methods of execution, well, one you hear most about is probably lethal injection, because that's in the US. But actually around the world is hanging that's most commonly used. But then there's also stoning, firing squad and beheadings in certain countries.
In Nigeria, there's a famous case a few years ago where somebody had been convicted of adultery, and the sentence was to be stoned to death. It's a method prescribed under Sharia law for certain crimes such as adultery, where somebody could be buried up to their neck and stoned to death by members of the public.
Well, it's difficult when you come in to talk about a humane way of executing another person, but one which has been considered to be the most humane way has been lethal injection, and that's in fact why it was implemented. But that's been called into question now, and there's a big debate going on in the US about how humane this method actually is. I think a lot of people were pro it because it seems so clinical, kind of like the person's just falling to sleep, but it's been called into question the different kind of drugs that they're using, and there was a famous case in Florida where it took 34 minutes for the person to die.
The difference between being on death row and living under a life imprisonment sentence will vary depending on the country. In some countries, people who are on death row are kept in isolated cells, which in some cases is preferable to being within the general prison population where you are in a cell with 17 other people. But on the other hand, you're quite isolated. You will have restrictions on your freedom and movement. You might only be able to go out for 1 hour a day. Your visits will be limited as well.
In the US, for example, it is more expensive to execute someone than to keep them for the rest of their natural life in prison, because appeal systems and things like that.
In other countries where you don't have these safeguards, where they're not followed as stringently as the US, for example, shooting somebody 2 hours after a judgment's been handed up is obviously cheaper than feeding that person in prison for the rest of their life or for whatever other sentence. It's not a unique deterrent. I think more of a deterrent would be the certainty of being arrested and convicted rather than the actual punishment. A lot of crimes are committed in the heat of the moment, which means people will not think about the consequences. So it's a crime of passion. So whether you have the death penalty or another penalty, it's really not going to make a difference.
Most people who say they're against the death penalty say it's because the state don't have a right to kill another person, and is the moral thing is how do you show that killing is wrong? By killing someone else. And then the other concerns such that an innocent person might be killed. Well, if you look at statistics about how many countries use the death penalty around the world, about 128 have abolished it in practice, whereas 69 countries retain it.
Amnesty International has found that the countries that use the death penalty most around the world are China, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the USA. Of those, China probably conducts the most executions. It's estimated that China executes approximately 1,770 people a year. However, researchers and analysts put the figure to be much, much higher. And the issue with China is that there's a lot of secrecy surrounding the executions. Very often, even the family of the person who's going to be executed will not know that this is going to take place. They might be informed after it has taken place where the person is buried, but it's conducted in secrecy. They will be executed, they will be buried, and that's it. No official government statistics are released. Since the Centre started work in this field in 1992, we have seen a vast reduction in the number of death sentences around the world, and more countries abolishing it. And it is our hope that more countries will abolish it in the future and replace the death penalty with a humane, proportionate and effective alternative sentence.
This is the case of Michael Johnson, who was convicted of murdering Jeff Wetterman. Now, as it turned out, he was committed to be killed on Thursday 19th of October at 6 p.m. However, he did commit suicide. I do need to just make it very clear that this was recorded before his death. You won't believe the amount of pupils that are very confused as to how he could be executed, but we still have this video. So all of this was recorded prior to his suicide, so he didn't actually go through with the lethal injection. We're going to look at this story from a number of different perspectives, however. So we've got the victim's wife, we've got the sister the law and life on death row. So I'll talk you through those. What you do need is to access the description below, and in that you will find a worksheet for you to write on or type in, because that's a really important part of what we're doing today, because I want you to get into the heart of the issue surrounding the death penalty. So we're going to start with Wetterman's wife. I'd like you to watch this, and then you'll come back to me and I'll choose the next part.
Before this, I never gave the death penalty any thought.
Really?
Really. I was too young. I mean, this was the last of my concerns, worried about dealing with someone on death row or, a family member of mine being murdered. We were married for 3 weeks, and we'd been back from our honeymoon a week and a half. And we'd gotten our wedding photos back about a week and a half after he was buried. And so we had to, the family, we all sat down together and went through them and ordered the pictures that we were going to get. And my sister-in-laws, Jeff's brother's wives, sat down with me, and we wrote funeral acknowledgments and wedding thank you notes for the gifts that we'd received at the same time. So that was a difficult day. It took them 2 days to find the guys, and the only reason they found them is because they were so proud of what they'd done that they'd bragged about it to their friends. And so fortunately, one of those friends called in to Crime Stoppers trying to claim the Crime Stopper money, and it took 8 months to come to trial. The trial took 3 weeks, and that was very difficult to hear the 911 tape. I will never forget the recording on the 911 tape. It was an awful thing to have to hear. And then when he was given the death penalty, Michael Johnson turned around and grabbed himself and cursed us. It was tough. It was tough for all of us. Every year we wondered, will this be the year that he's put to death? Or, what hurdles are we going to have to cross this year? How many hearings are going to be held? Or are we going to have to write letters on another issue? It's very difficult not knowing when you open up the paper if you're going to read about your story, or, flipping through the channels if something's going to come on the news that you're unaware of. So it's, and when you see something like that and you're not prepared for it, it jolts you. And the last 3 weeks, I know I had trouble sleeping. I'm sure the Wettermans did too. Just a nervous kind of energy, and constantly wondering if you were going to get a call today that it wasn't going to happen. I was angry this morning. I was mad because I felt like, that he'd deprived us of this. We'd been anticipating it for 11 years and thought we were finally going to take the trip down there. And then to find out that he'd committed suicide. And, I was angry. I felt somewhat cheated, if he was going to do this. I wish he could have done it 10 years ago and saved us all the time and worry and the taxpayers some money. I was nervous about his last words, whether or not he would be ugly, which he probably would have been. But I was concerned about how it would affect me because, anytime you're going to watch someone be put to death, you should be concerned. If you're not concerned, then, personally, I feel that anyone that's against the death penalty, that maybe you really shouldn't have an opinion until you're put in that situation.
Okay, the next thing we're going to look at then is Michael Johnson's sister, and this is what she says about the death penalty.
We had that whole love-hate relationship going, like every brother and sister. We had a 5-year difference between us, so it was, him barking at me and me annoying the tar out of him, and going back and forth at each other. When we got to that point where any siblings get, it just happened to be through glass instead of out in the real world. It's unjust and it's unfair. It's extremely inhumane. I mean, it would be better if they brought back the firing squad. I mean, that is more humane than the torture they put them through now. This is the same process that they stopped doing on animals because it was inhumane. So it's not okay for Rover, but it's okay for, you know, John Doe. So it just, no. I mean, it doesn't matter how they look at it or how they do it. It's still murder. You're not supposed to kill another human being. Two wrongs don't make a right. You know, especially the state. The only thing these people are state-paid, government-assisted murderers. That's it. Michael was such a strong person, and he was so, I don't know how to say it, just such a presence that it seemed more than unjust for the capital punishment to be carried out. You know, he went out on his own, and that made it easier for him, which made it easier for us. It's nice to know that they didn't get him. That's wonderful to know. That lightens my heart a million times. They've taken 11 years of his life away from him. His death was his own. We're gonna go ahead and do a cremation, and we'll come back Monday and pick up the ashes, and just as a family we'll carry on. We'll get through it somehow.
The next part is going to be about the law. Now, this is done by someone in the judiciary in Texas. Now, they're not going to say they've ever executed anyone incorrectly, because that's their job, to sort of protect the benefits of the death penalty. So watch this with that knowledge in your head.
In Texas, one thing, again, that people don't necessarily know or isn't common knowledge, you know, regardless of whether or not you actually pull the trigger, if you're participating in a capital murder, then you also are guilty of capital murder. Which is why in some cases we may have 3 individuals on death row for one crime, even though obviously only one actually carried out the crime, but that is the law. So, you know, honestly, when it comes down to it, if both of them were there, they're both guilty of capital murder, regardless of who actually pulled the trigger. I mean, oftentimes if you have several co-defendants in one case and one gets a death penalty or one gets a larger sentence than another, it usually depends on who it is that actually cooperates with the police first, you know, and is able to make a deal before the others fall. A couple of weeks before the execution, an inmate is given the opportunity to make various selections. They can choose, you know, what their spiritual preference is. They can choose if they want to have witnesses, a last meal, all those types of things. And in Mr. Johnson's case, he didn't request anything. You know, he said that he was not a spiritual person, did not request a spiritual advisor. He did not ask for any last meal. And he didn't ask for anybody to witness on his behalf, even though he did have family and friends who were around who would come and visit him. He just opted not to have them there. Once an inmate is scheduled to be executed, and it gets to be about 36 hours out from when the execution would be scheduled, we begin checking their cell every 15 minutes so we can observe what they're doing, we record what they're doing, and just continuously are monitoring them. Sometime between the 2:30 check this morning and the 2:45 check, Mr. Johnson took a weapon that he had fashioned. It looked like, literally, it looks like popsicle sticks, and using something that, if it was not a razor, was a metal piece that had been sharpened like a razor, and he used it to slash one of his veins in his neck, and then also an artery in his arm. So, you know, when he was found, he was alive, but he was unresponsive, and he was taken to a local hospital where he died about an hour later. So he actually did commit suicide. You know, in Texas, it's never been determined, that it has never been found that an innocent person has been executed. And I think that the people who work for the prison system and work for the state are confident in the process and in knowing that there are so many checks and balances that are in place, so many appeals and so many courts and so many people looking at these cases that, you know, that it's just not something that should ever happen.
And lastly, I'd like you to watch this. This is Life on Death Row with Michael Johnson. I'd like you to watch this, please.
Where I'm at right now, I'm in 5 cell, and there are 14 cells in Death Watch. And when I got in there, it was so full. They had it full and had 3 more cells in the next section that had people with execution dates. Since I've been in there, they've emptied out 6 cell twice. Got a 3rd guy in there. They've killed the guy on this side, and they got another guy in there. And the only people that are left in that whole section are me and one other guy. Everybody else has been killed, and then they've put new people in there. And so I think there's 8 people in there. And since I don't know how many they've killed. I didn't count the numbers, but over a dozen since I've been over here, not over 200 since I've been on death row. So over the years, you get to the point where it's just part of life. Really, I'm kind of curious. I was telling my sister, I'm a little bit anxious, but at the same time, I'm curious. I'm ready to, because this sucks around here. I mean, not that I've got a death wish or anything, but yeah, come on. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, you never know. I mean, you could have a panic attack at the last minute or something. I'm sure that could happen. I imagine there are people that have done that, but I mean, I haven't heard about it. I've heard of a few people fall, but most of them praising Jesus or whatever, you know. I mean, if that's what you want to do, go ahead, but I'm not doing that. I think lethal injection is bullshit. I would rather have a firing squad. If they gave me a choice, I would choose a firing squad. At least I can stand up then. You know, they got me like I'm a Christian or something, you know? And it's like, man. And like I'm telling you, they try to do that to make it, it's like they're making it easy on themselves. Trying to make it look like we're really not doing anything. We're just, but yeah, you are. You're killing people. I mean, it sucks. I don't want to go. I'd rather not, but there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay, I'm not sure whether you would accept the final statement that he made there, or whether there's actually a question now that's in your mind. But that is true, that is fact, what I've just showed you, and that is what in fact occurred. There's a reflection sheet now as well for you to answer those questions, so I'd like you, that's part of that worksheet, I'd like you to do that now, please. Okay, so we said it would be good if we know what the death penalty is, and I think we've kind of got that idea really clearly now. Great if we give arguments for and against it, and that's what we're going to move on to in a moment. Before we do that, however, I'd like to think about these 3 Christian views that people might hold. So let's just watch this and just make sure you've got notes from this.
Well, Christians take basically 3 views on this. There are those that say the death penalty is mandatory because only God can give and take life, and so if someone offends by taking someone else's life, then they don't deserve to live anymore. Then there are those that say, no, that was Old Testament, and in the New Testament, Jesus forgave people, and he died on the cross so that no one else should ever have to be put to death, and so death penalty is completely disallowed. And the third view is that the death penalty is permissive, but not mandatory. As it happens, I'm against the death penalty, but on pragmatic grounds rather than on theoretical ones. Verdict's always a matter of a balance of probabilities, and terrible mistakes have been made, and you can never be absolutely, or very rare, you can be absolutely certain that someone's guilty, or you can't see inside someone, you don't know what the mitigating factors might be, what's happened earlier in life that might trigger violence or so forth. I think there are several aspects to punishment, and retribution in the sense of rebalancing life and justice, and paying one's dues to society, and deterrence, but also rehabilitation and training and a chance to make a new life, redemption, all those things are very important as well. When Saddam Hussein when we knew he was going to be executed, several people said, this was barbaric, this was terrible. I said that although I was against the death penalty, I thought that if due process had been followed in their legal system, if that if Saddam Hussein had had a fair trial, and if the international community decided that he'd had a chance to appeal and they'd gone through the process regularly, then I thought it'd be wrong to put pressure on them. I think you can say it's just that if someone takes a life, then they've stopped having a right to their own life. So in that sense, it's just. I would then go on to say there's more to be said, and there's a possibility of giving the person time to repent and to be rehabilitated and to be forgiven, and that's the way that you should go.
Beautiful. And that brings us up to our sort of last part of today's session, which is arguments for and against the death penalty. So behind me are a load of quotes that Christians use. Some Christians support the death penalty, some do not. And we'll think more about that next time. But what I'd like you to do is for a moment do a T table. So you've got for and against. You can just see that over my shoulder there. And I'd like you to write these statements in the box that you think they go in. Are they arguments for the death penalty, or are they arguments against the death penalty? Pause me, then come back to me when you're done. Lovely. So we said this lesson would explore Christian attitudes towards the death penalty, and now we've started to really reach some arguments for and against it. I'd like to just end then with this C-style exam question. Explain from two different Christian traditions views on the death penalty. Now, let me just bridge that gap for you, because you've got lots of information there. For the purpose of your exam, Roman Catholics traditionally have been for the death penalty. We're going to look more about that next time. Pope Francis himself has very recently said that he can't see how the death penalty is in fact a moral good standing point, and various popes have begun changing the ideas of that. However, we'll look more at the Church Catechism next time. Church of England would be against the death penalty on this occasion. They would say that it was barbaric and doesn't give anyone the chance of rehabilitation or reform, as we spoke about recently. So it's a C question. You need two quotes, so you need to look at your tool item quotes that we went through previously. I'd look at an eye for an eye and turn the other cheek, or 7 times 70 you should forgive. You need one paragraph really for this question saying why the death penalty is wrong, which would be a Church of England perspective, and one why they might say that it is acceptable, which would be a Roman Catholic perspective from tradition anyway. Give yourself 8 minutes. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time. Take care of yourself, stay safe, wash your hands, God bless you. I'll see you soon.